Welcome to the Luminaries in and out of Sect podcast, a show about the moon and how astrologers embody and relate to it. My name is SP Hall, and I'm your host. In today's episode on the Capricorn Moon as the luminary out of Sect, I speak with a very thoughtful, kind astrologer, Ángeles Lopez, better known to most of you as Madame Anshelyk. In this conversation, we talk about Ángeles' Capricorn Moon in their 12th host sign house, Buddhism and the nature of the self, and many other things. From dodekatemoria to firdaria to Platonism as a philosophical foundation for astrology, to a Mayan myth about the birth of the sun and moon. And despite the fact that this conversation was recorded several weeks ago, we also touch a bit on the Saturn discourse that's been making the rounds on social media, and the beneficence, or at least the necessity, of maleficence. But we also get into some sensitive topics, so here is a bit of a trigger warning. In particular, we talked about mental health challenges, suicidality, death, and the use of plant-based medicines, or entheogens. So if those are sensitive subjects for you, I would proceed with that in mind. In addition, I also wanted to mention what the recent Mars station has been teaching me about my capabilities, my capacities, and how I need to proceed with this podcast. Given my available time and resources right now, providing transcription for my podcast episodes is something that's not possible at the moment with any expediency. I'm sorry for overpromising and underdelivering on this, and to all those that make the show less accessible. Hopefully in the future, I'll be able to figure out a way to ensure that accessibility tool is available, as accessibility is an important issue to me. With that said, I wanted to give a shout out to Jose, who is Small Dog Star on Twitter, for volunteering to transcribe EY Washington's episode sometime soon. I really appreciated that offer. Thank you, Jose. So keep an eye out for that transcript soon. But now for the wonderful conversation that I had with Ángeles. I hope you enjoy it. Please be sure to check out the links to their website and socials below, as well as links to some of the resources that we touch on in our conversation. Ángeles, thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure to be with you. How are you doing?
Hi, SP. I'm very well. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very, very happy to be here with you.
Awesome. It's my pleasure. And how have you been doing with the recent astro weather that we've been experiencing? Is Mercury retrograde being okay? Mercury retrograde on top of Mars retrograde?
It's been interesting because it has been like a mixture of Mercury is right now my Time Lord, perfection-wise from the ascendant, and Mars is my monthly perfection Lord from the ascendant right now. So since the change from the monthly change from Venus to Mars, it's been much more tricky. Before with Venus, it was a little bit more funny, like mixing things, but right now it's a little bit more I don't know how to say it, like uncertain whatever will happen, and I'm trying really, really hard not to lose my head with this transit. How about you?
I hear you. Yeah, my birthday was on Christmas, and my Time Lord changed via perfection from the Sun to Mercury, and it's definitely felt different. You know, Mercury went retrograde a few days later. Mars has been retrograde for the last 5 million years. So getting by the best I can, but I'm definitely feeling energy levels a bit lower, and I'm seeing like glitching too on the internet, you know, like Twitter. There was that Twitter went down that day, and I feel like other websites are like slow to load, and so I'm kind of seeing the Mercury retrograde in my life and in, you know, out in the world as well.
Sure. Yes, it's a try for our patience, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Venus as your Time Lord, when it was your monthly Time Lord, did you catch some? Was that Venus in Capricorn, or did you catch some of Venus when it was in Sagittarius?
In Capricorn.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Yeah, I love Venus in Capricorn. I feel like it's such a grounded energy.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Well, I was hoping we could start with you giving a a brief introduction, or maybe not so brief if you don't want to, introduction to yourself.
Sure, I'll try to keep it brief because sometimes I can't even when I try to. Well, I'm a practicing astrologer. I've been practicing for 4 years now. When I began my studies, I started with modern astrology, but I somewhat felt that something was missing. And then I stumbled upon traditional astrology, thanks to Chris Brennan and the astrology podcast. And I found like this is what I was needing.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to discover what kind of astrology I wanted to practice, because technically I early on understood that it would be a traditional approach, but in regards to the philosophy and the angle and what for, it took a while. So I learned from Chris Brennan, from Adam Ellenbach. I don't know if you know him, but
yeah, a little bit.
I like a lot his mystical, spiritual approach to astrology, and from Demetra George, from Ben Dykes, and in somewhere in the way, I listened to Robert Schmidt and his take on Platonism as the framework of Hellenistic astrology. And even though I know it's like an speculation and maybe just one faction of the Hellenistic astrologers, I don't know, communed with Platonism, for me it made a lot of sense. So from there, I said, yes, this is like what I need. And I think it fits very well with this relational approach that I've learned also from other younger astrologers, as I don't know, Jason Hawley, Palas K. Augustine, Diana Rose Harper. And I kind of make a blend of this Platonist approach with the wisdom of nature approach, trying to foster this relationship within ourselves, but also with others, human and non-human beings. And that's kind of the kind of astrology I've been doing for some years now.
Wonderful. Yeah, you said you started practicing professionally in 2019. Is that correct?
Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, so it's been a few years now of professional practice, and then you were a student for how long before that, did you say? A number of years?
I started studying in 2010, but
Okay.
not that I don't know how skillfully. Like I started like as a hobby whenever I had time. I found it astrology interesting, but not that interesting. It was until a couple of years before starting practicing like professionally that I really decided that I was going to study big time astrology, because I found another dimension of meaning in there, and also some heavy transits happening there. Yeah. So it was a couple of years before, and when I started practicing with my family, friends, the friends of friends, the friends of friends of friends, like charging just very little, because I wanted to practice. And then as I have been gaining confidence, I've been expanding the offerings and all that.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I've actually started recently myself doing, I did my second natal chart reading a week or two ago, and I did my first one like a month or so ago, and it's been really interesting getting that experience of like sitting with someone face to face with their chart, rather than just looking at a chart and kind of delineating it yourself. But that experience of like, how is this chart actually lived, which I think is so important to hear what that embodiment is like from the actual person, from the native.
Sure, because that's another whole skill set, because you can be very savvy in astrology, but then you have to know how to communicate that in a way that helps the other person and in a way that recognizes their experience, and not like telling them, oh, you should be like this or whatever, and the other person is like, what are you talking about? It's an art.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, not to get too off on like my own thing that I'm doing, but I'm reminded of I also do some horary astrology, and it's interesting how like there's that concept in astrology of radicality, where things are rooted in the chart and they tell a story. and they talk about in electional astrology, the radicality that's supposed to be in the natal chart as well of the person using the election. And Hori is an interesting thing because there's almost like the radicality is in the moment that the astrologer picks the chart, and the story is supposed to be told in that. Not supposed to, but like generally you see the story told in that, but it often doesn't actually apply to the person who's asking the question. And so there's this interesting divorce between the chart of the moment and the chart of the person asking the question almost doesn't matter. That's not completely true, but most times it is true. So there's this interesting divide, I think, between those two things that I'm seeing.
Yes, I totally agree. And also, I think that horary is really great in order for us to understand this, that the chart is not a static thing, but it's moving all the time. And it's not just saying something, but it can tell a lot of stories depending where are we approaching it from and the context of the person is living. And I think that understanding that comes much more naturally from horary, we can extrapolate to natal, and it helps a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree. Two things that you referred to that I just want to like return to and get some clarity on is you referred to wisdom of nature, and I was hoping like you can, is that similar to animism, or is that a different concept?
Yes, in one part it's linked to animism, which comes in my case from the Platonic point of view, but also I was referring to the wisdoms of mainly from Amerindian native cultures, which have this knowledge of the interconnectedness we have with nature, and the way they approach nature as teacher, and the way they believe in also, well, it's another way of animism, the way the water, the wind, the sun, the trees, everything, the animals have their wisdom, and if we learn to listen to them, we can learn from them because we are part of a whole ecosystem, not just like humans in our world, but are part of a bigger picture. And seeing from that cosmogony of the Native Americans, mostly from Mexico and from South America, because I know very little of the Native Americans of North America. Okay. The little I know, I like it, but I'm mostly ignorant of them. But from Mexico and South America, I mean, it's not that I'm expert either, but the encounters I've had with shamans and this kind of people that embody this kind of wisdom has been also a life changer for me.
And just to clarify, maybe for people who aren't super familiar, you're born and raised in Mexico, correct?
Yes, sorry, I didn't mention that. Yes, no, I'm Mexican, okay. Born and raised.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you for explaining that. And then do you mind talking about the ideas in Platonism that kind of resonate most with you, and maybe how that relates to animism, if it does?
The way I've approached Platonism through the lens or by the hands of Edward Butler, who is a philosopher animist also. And I've learned a lot from his approach to Plato, which might be very different from other academic approaches to Plato. And the good or the god or all the gods are perfect and are good, and they try to help us to be good, and they communicate with us through everything in the cosmos, be it the planets, be it also nature. And although when they act in our sublunar realm, their actions might be confusing because they are blending with our confused minds or spirits or whatever. They have always this I don't know how to say it, like they are pointing to our divine nature and pointing to the ways in which we can come back to that divine nature, but not in how can I say it? Not rejecting the material realm, but understanding that they are part of the same thing. Right. Although when we are confused, we suffer from matter because we are learning to perceive with a much clearer view. And I mean, I could say a lot more about that, but more or less that's the idea.
I did an undergraduate degree in philosophy, so I know like yeah, these are things that we can talk about for years. Yeah, absolutely. But thank you for explaining that. And I think just one other question, because I'm interested in like the philosophy that astrologers bring to their practice. The one thing that struck me when I was reading your website was this emphasis on ecology that you mentioned, and also this kind of seemingly maybe dual idea of going from chaos to cosmos, and then the reiteration of like we are chaos and we are cosmos. And I was wondering if you could talk more about your ideas about that.
Sure. I have been a Buddhist practitioner for almost 20 years now.
Oh,
so
wow.
Buddhism is also a very deeply ingrained part of my life and my way of seeing the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to get too deep in that because it will be
Yeah.
another whole subject. But I'm saying this because from the point of view of Buddhism, also we don't see what there is, but we see what our conditioning filters allow us to see. And part of the liberation process is learning to tear down those veils that doesn't allow us to see things as they are, and learning to see things as they are. And Buddhism is very focused in the mind and the purification of the mind. And maybe because of my natural tendencies, at the beginning of my Buddhist practice, I was very disconnected from my body because I was like, I need to cultivate my mind and understand my mind and all this stuff that I think it's valuable. But for some of us, it's also, well, for all of us, it's also important to ground in the way, in the earth we are, and in the nature we are, and in the families we are, and the societies we are. And for an important part of my life, I live a little disconnected from that earthy quality of life. And then when I stumbled upon these, I don't know, like shamanic practices that kind of make us come back to our bodies, to nature, to recognize that we are part of a bigger picture, right. Not just abstractly, but concretely part of a bigger picture. That made me understand that something that might be pretty obvious for other people, but for 12th house Capricorn Moon is not that obvious. That we are also our bodies, and we are also the communities from which we come, and we are also the environments in which we live, and that we need to take care of our bodies, of our families, of our whatever we consider our family. I'm not just talking about the blood family, although of course it can be applied, but our circles, let's say, and the earth from which we are born, and from which we eat, and from which we live, because without these material conditions, we can't exist. And so at the beginning of my encounter with this other cosmogony, my inner world shattered because it was, oh no, what is this? I don't understand. And it was a deep crisis of faith, because I thought, what am I doing? Was I wrong? Is Buddhism wrong? What's happening? But after some years, I kind of found that they are not at odds, just that they are complementary approaches. And right now, I think that it is very important for us to recognize this material part of us, this human, animal, instinctive part of who we are, and this relational part of who we are, and not just to strive for our inner liberation, but to strive for that inner liberation in order to help other beings to be free also, which might also enter in the Buddhist point of view. But now I try to frame it, including this more material point of view. And from this, how know, from the chaos and cosmos things, I think that when we are confused and lost, it might be very frightening, and confusing. But from that chaos, order can come, cosmos can come, and we can reinvent ourselves. And I think, as you said, this is like going and coming. because it's not that we are aiming for a perfect static cosmos or order and to stay there, but it's a come and go, let's say. And when you start, I don't know, like feeling more comfortable with that inner chaos, that inner uncertainty, that inner darkness, if you may, I believe that we start to understand that it's not that cosmos is more preferable than chaos. Both are nice, all right? I don't know if nice is the word, but we can learn from both, and we shouldn't fear any one of those. But we have to learn how to relate with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm reminded of something on your website talking about connecting movement to identity. And I feel like there's something really important here about that movement between chaos and cosmos. If we can kind of think of them as different things, they can be one and the same thing even, but if we think about them as different things and kind of the movement from coherence to incoherence or chaos to unity or what have you, I feel like there's something really important in that idea, and it resonates with me and kind of my own ideas about my sense of self, which I feel like they may kind of be somewhat Buddhist in a sense of, I don't necessarily believe that I have a fixed identity, and maybe that's being a Sag rising with a Sag moon and all of that fire and air in my chart. But I think at the center of it, there is no fixed identity. The thing that I identify with most and that I feel is the most spiritual thing within me is this emptiness, this like void that I can touch base with or come into contact with, and then things can emerge from that in the same way of chaos. We are chaos and we are cosmos, or from chaos to cosmos, what have you. Like, we need emptiness. We need a recession of something for something else to come into being, to arise. We need the winter for the spring and the summer, which is why I think in this Capricorn time that we're in, I'm a Capricorn sun, I feel like it's really important to acknowledge, and talking to a very Saturnine person as well, I think it's important to acknowledge the need for Saturn, the need for the malefics. If we just have the benefics, we have an overflowing of life. And sometimes we need things to be trimmed and cut away for the proper growth to occur, for lack of a better term.
Yep, totally. And I think everything you shared is very beautiful. I really appreciate it a lot, because I agree with everything you said. Starting with this, the importance of the, for one side, like integrating duality, especially when we are talking about ourselves, because when we have, we all, but especially when we have a lot of oppositions in our charts, or at least one opposition in our chart, there's this like conflict between I am this way, but I am also this way. I want this, but I also want this. And then that sometimes engenders like self-doubt or self-loathing, or like not appreciating who we are, because we tend to identify with this is good, this is bad, I shouldn't be feeling this, I should be feeling that. And that generates a lot of inner chaos, not nice chaos, but conflicting chaos.
Right.
And I think that also happens within societies and everything, that not being able to understand what you said, that it's not that is this or is this, is that it's this and it also is this. And for this to be properly valued, you need this. And for this to be properly valued, you need this. And if you stay a lot of time in just one extreme, it's going to suck. Which I think it's also another of the nice things of Platonism, this reconciliation of extremes, or tempering of extremes, that I find really interesting and useful, because it says we can say that very easily, but it's not easily practiced. And I like the way you put it, because as a heavily malefic person, I have come to reconcile with my malefic side, and even being grateful for that, because if it were not for that malefic side, I must probably have been dead a long time ago,
Yeah.
or my life would be much more terrible. Well, not that
Yeah.
it's terrible now, but it would be harder if I didn't have like this fighting ability, let's say.
Mm.
And I think it's really interesting. And also the other part you said about the intrinsic identity, I agree totally with that. The Buddha would agree with you too.
Mm.
But also, I believe that, as you said, there might be no substance in any of us, but there's this awareness.
Yes.
And that awareness, as you said, is like a space for everything to be possible, for everything to emerge.
Mm.
And it's exactly when we start like identifying with something that, well, that something takes shape, but also that we close the possibility of something else to emerge. But really, really, well, I don't, it's not that I know what reality is. I mean, I'm learning, but what I'm trying to say, it's really nice to be more aware about this awareness, this naked awareness that is not limited by an idea of who we are. And I think that that's very Sagittarius, but
Yeah.
that's also really, really, really nice.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Yeah, and thank you for what you said about like the importance of the malefics, because I also have very an angular malefic and then like a very dignified malefic, and I do think I can really see the how those planets can be beneficial, and how those planets can, I know that the definition of malefic is like kind of contrary to life, but I do think that sometimes the pruning away really can bring forth life and growth in ways that wouldn't otherwise be there, as you mentioned. So I do wanted to talk about very briefly how we know each other, because I think this episode is really interesting to some of the past episodes, because I know Erin and I know Diana relatively well, but this is actually the first conversation that you and I are ever having. We're having it across Zoom, but we're ever having kind of face to face. And I think it's important to provide that context so that listeners can maybe understand how this conversation could potentially be different, or why it might be different in certain ways. So I just wanted to kind of provide that information. But I also think that so I posted a few weeks ago because I had a hard time. I found my Sag moons really easy. I have a Sag moon. You know, we find each other. I have a bunch of them in my life, but I didn't know of any astrologers with Cap moons and Aquarius moons. And so I I put a post out on Twitter, like, shout out to my Cap Aquarius moons. Like, what are things that you like about your moon, and what's a challenge? And so many people responded, which I really appreciated. Shout out to all the people that participated in that. I really appreciated it. And I learned so much about these Saturnine moons. And you posted on that as well. But I also feel like even before I started the podcast, you've just been so supportive of like my learning process in astrology. And so I was really excited when you posted that. And I was like, yes, Ángeles has a Capricorn moon. I'm gonna ask them if they'll be on the podcast. And you were so gracious to accept the invitation, which I really appreciated. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything more to say about that.
I am also very grateful of the opportunity because, as you said, we kind of found each other in Twitter, and that has been our whole interaction until today. And it's been really nice for me because I'm always a big fan of kind people, of curious people, of intelligent people, and you fit in all the categories.
Mm-hmm.
So it was always really easy to talk to you, to discuss ideas. I've always found you really insightful, but also very curious, as I said. And I like that because sometimes it's not so easy to find that combination of someone that has a lot to say, but also a lot of space to listen. So I immediately recognized that in you, and I said, oh, this guy is nice. And after reading your tweets and engaging a little bit more, I really liked the way I perceive you respect astrology, which is something for me is really important. I don't like people who I feel don't respect astrology. And also the care you put in your practice. That's also something that I admire and inspires me. And that's why even when sometimes I'm a little bit hesitant to engage or interact with people, I don't know, or whatever, because I'm like this again, 12th moon, 12th house Capricorn moon, like, oh, I don't know, you go away. But it was really nice and flowing, and I'm very happy that it brings us here, because it's been really nice so far.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was so sweet of you to say. I think the first I might have someone's cutting onions over here. I might have shed a tear or two. The first tears have been shed in this conversation. I really appreciate that. That was very sweet. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to getting more into this conversation and hearing your experience, because I feel like you already, it's been great so far, and you have so much to say. And I wanted to touch on a quote that I read on your website. Yeah, so I'm just going to translate this, and I hope I do a good job because you wrote it in Spanish, but it says, one of the greatest prides of my life is that I've learned to be happy without sacrificing my critical capacity and my sense of reality. Is that a fair translation, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I moved, my words moved myself.
That is wonderful. I love that. I was hoping that we could use that quote as a springboard to like get into this conversation a little bit, because I feel like that is such a really good, I don't know how you feel, but I feel like it's such a good encapsulation of your rising sign, where your moon is, and your, very dignified Saturn in the 9th house in Libra. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Oh, yes, that's a great way to start, I believe, because for the first part of my life, even though it's not that I had great tragedies or great terrible things happening to me, I was very unhappy person. The world ached me. The social dynamics, the environmental crisis, the economic craziness, everything in the world ached me, and it was really hard for me to get out of like a barrier of fear and resentment and a lot of not very nice emotions that were like there in like making very rigid my heart and my approach to life, because that fear and that pain coming from a Capricorn moon was not expressed like crying or like being like all the time like, oh, the world is so sad. It was like, oh, the world is shit, so okay, we need to I don't know, to solve things and to keep walking or whatever. And even though when I always found like ways to cope with the world, I really didn't like the world. I for most part of my life, I wanted to disappear, to die, to go away. I didn't like anything in life, and I remember since I was a kid, in in elementary school, wondering like, what is this? I mean, I will grow up, I will marry, I will have a house, I will have a car, I will have a dog. And what like, what does that mean? What is that all that there is in the world? And if that is all that there is in the world, I would better die right now, because I don't find it appealing or attractive or nice or whatever. And it was also like a very isolating experience, because in part, I think, because of my exalted Saturn in the 9th, and also because of my Leo sun, I believe. This wasn't so obvious with the people that I interacted in school and everything. Everything seemed to go smooth. I always had good grades. I never had like real problems in my family, or like in disciplinary problems or whatever. But that made me feel more isolated, because my friends, my family, my teachers, whatever, they thought, oh, she's all right. But I was not right. And it was really hurtful experience.
Yeah.
But after first with Buddhism, precisely, first it was like a bummer, because when I thought about reincarnation. I was like, oh, even if I die, this doesn't end. So it goes on and on and on. But after seeing like there was a path to a better life, I said, well, okay, this might help. And I started practicing, and I really believe that Saturn helped a lot, because I took my practice really seriously. When I started practicing, I meditated every day for a couple of hours. I woke up really early in the morning to meditate. I went to classes, I read books, I went to retreats. I really took very, very seriously my approach to Buddhism, maybe more seriously than would be healthy in retrospective. But at the same time, I think that it helped me to start balancing myself and I don't know, like exploring not just the dark side of the force, but also the light side of the force. And without making this very very long, it's been like a journey in trying to find a reconciliation between precisely not ignoring that there are these things in the world that I don't think they are easy or nice or whatever, but also that is not everything that there is, because there is also love, and there is also, I don't know, a lot of beautiful things in the world. And trying to live more accordingly with this extended reality, and not just this closed, gloomy, dark part of perceiving, which was my most natural lens to life when I was born.
Wow, there's so much there. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing so openly. I think the thing that comes to mind first is I want to talk about that sun in the 7th, and then I feel like I want to hear about your Venus placement, because I feel like maybe what you just described can describe the relationship between maybe your moon and Venus. But I was curious if like there was some element with the Leo sun in the 7th of people can see, like there's an element of you shining that people see that's maybe not like you said, there it's not all there is, or it's just the outside, but there's something inside that's not necessarily able to be seen. Like I'm reminded of Jason Hawley's lecture on the sun, where this idea of like people aren't really able to get too close to the sun. Like people can't really like get to know what's inside the sun because the sun shines so bright. It's like you kind of have to stay a little bit away from it, enjoy it at a distance. And I wonder if like there was some element of that, or what your relationships at that time were kind of characterized by.
Yes, I could say a lot about that, but just to try to keep it short. Since my sun is in the 7th, it has been mostly in close one-on-one relationships, or in partnerships, in romantic relationships, even when this contradiction between my sun and my moon and my Venus has been really evident, because with most of my partners, I've always felt like it was nice and fun, and we could share a lot of things, and we could share like this exterior part of learning, of traveling, of, I don't know, like the most visible part of our lives, which was honest. But I felt like there was this lonely, sad part of myself that wasn't getting the recognition that it needed. And that made me feel, I could give a lot of stories, but sometimes like far away, or sometimes me myself pushing the other person away for them not to see that other part of me. And also in regards to my Venus, not only in romantic relationships, but in relationships in general, there's like this also like contest between a part of me that wants to be more nurturing and more caring and more loving, more affectionate, and this other part of me that is not, no, that's not practical. Why would I do that? I don't know. I don't want that. And I think that my Venus placement also has suffered a lot, because she has been like strange, both by its ruler, the moon in Capricorn, but also by the square of Saturn. And so Venus has like wanting to give a lot of love, but not finding so many places where to express it. And the principal way, not way, the principal place in which my Venus has found its way out has been historically in my workplaces. Not all of them, but from the time I started working in jobs that made sense to me, like that I believe they were meaningful. Of course, not the corporate jobs I had before, but the hippie work I started to have from my Saturn return afterwards. There it is where I felt that this Cancer Venus could come out and express in a secure place, and also this needs to balance, because sometimes that Venus can go, that can overwhelm, can go all the way, and sometimes she also needs like a stop or something. Like that makes sense.
Yeah, like using whole sign houses, I feel like there's something, especially with what people reflected on that Twitter post about the Capricorn moon, of being loving in a very practical way, or being caring in very practical ways. And I think Venus in the 6th house like can operate in that way, especially in Cancer. But I feel like there is a reason why Venus joys in the 5th, you know, like the house of pleasure and the house of creativity, rather than the house of, you know, the 6th house can be associated with work, can be associated with like day-to-day habits. So there is that, you know, it's interesting that came out for you at work,
Yes.
that Venus placement.
Yes, because I think that I don't know how to say that it was when I felt that I was giving service, to a meaningful service, and I felt connected to the people to whom I was working with, that Venus could flow. And it was really nice. I mean, I found most of my closest, deepest friendships in my work environments precisely because of this. But at the same time, coming back to the disconnection of the body of that Capricorn moon, it had a price, because for many years I worked a lot, because I was working for things that I found meaningful, and then working every day, even weekends, not sleeping, just working and working and working, because I liked it and I thought it was meaningful. And yes, it was meaningful, but I forgot that I also had to sleep. I also had to do other things. I also had to talk about things that weren't Buddhism or now astrology or whatever. And then it entailed to learn to balance that, like that giving, for it to be sustainable for my health. Because again, in another signification of the 6th, even when it's been Venus, and it hasn't been that terrible so far, it has had some health issues,
Right.
this giving thing.
Yeah, and it makes sense that the moon ruling that Venus from the 12th in Capricorn, and what you said about this disembodiment that maybe you had when you came into Buddhism, you know, which you've had to learn how to kind of embody and become mindful of the ecology that you're part of in many ways, like maybe overextending yourself, overextending your body in certain ways, for that, you know, Venus in the 6th purpose of doing that work and bringing together those work relationships that you had and what have you.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
Because there's also this close relationship, not just between my moon and the Venus, but also with Saturn, that squares both of them. But also Saturn is co-present with Mars, which is the ruler of my MC. And so my life is like very, very focused in these religious, spiritual working themes. That's my life most of the time. Well, sometimes competing with my love life and that Leo sun wanting attention or whatever.
Oh,
But
interesting.
it has been like a main focus, that 9, 10, 6, 12th house connection in my chart.
Yeah. So going back to your childhood a little bit, did you have any kind of relationship with the moon when you were a child?
I can find like 2 extremes in my relationship with the moon that I'll try to pinpoint. Because when in my childhood, at least, I didn't feel the connection to the moon. Maybe because again it's in detriment in the 12th conjunct south, so besieged by malefics. It's a nice moon. So I was like really disconnected of my body, of moon, of nature, of everything.
Yeah.
But I remember. Well, I don't remember. But my mother has told me a story that I remember. That when I was born, I was born from 8 months, so I stayed sometime in the incubator. And my mother was and my family, they were fearful because they thought that I was mute, because I was the only baby that didn't cry in the nursery.
Oh, wow.
And even then, when they took me home for a couple of days, I didn't cry. And my mother was like, "Oh, she's mute because she doesn't cry." And she gave me the food whenever it was supposed that I should eat, and I did everything else good, but I just didn't cry. But then, since my mother, my father, my brothers carried me a lot, then it came a moment when the Leo sun came out, I guess, and when they laid me down in the cradle, I started shouting and crying, and why are you leaving me? I want attention, or whatever. But for the very first days of my life, I was like not crying, like mute, like very Capricorn Moon. And that story was really interesting for me, even before astrology. But when I came to astrology, I was like, oh, yes, this is such a Capricorn Moon story, because there's this disconnection. I'm not sure why, but I know that there was this disconnection from it. And even though there might be other moments in my connection to the moon, one moment that I remember that it's kind of funny, but also it was meaningful for me, is that the very first time that I went to an ayahuasca ceremony, I went with a friend of mine that she is very lunar and very extroverted and very connected to nature. She's like the yin of my yang, or the yang of my yin, I don't know. But we are like very, very different persons. And we were in this ceremony. And at a given moment in the ceremony, I hadn't puked in the whole ceremony. And then she told me, "Have you seen the moon? Don't you think it's like a portal?" And I look at the moon, saw the moon. I
Oh my
puked
gosh.
in the precise moment that I saw the moon. And I didn't quite understood it right then. But in retrospective, I think that the moon was saying, "Hello, hello, I'm here. Look at me. You need to
Right.
connect with this force." And from then on, it was like the first experience I had in this wisdom of nature thing that I was telling you before. And it really changed the way I relate with my body, with nature, and lots of things. And I find it very curious that this celestial body that I ignored for the most part of my life suddenly came and made like this activation in an instant, and catalyzed by a person that is very lunar and very connected to these cycles. And it was really interesting.
Wow, that's so interesting. And it also feels very apropos of the moon, very fitting for the moon, of like, the moon is the planet that connects the most because it moves the fastest. And so for you to like be brought into connection, or back into connection with the moon from your friend who's like represents the moon in your life, feels very beautiful. There's something beautiful about that. I wanted to ask a question about Saturn and your relationship to astrology, because when we were talking before, I know we're a bit all over the place, but when we were talking before, in preparation for the episode, you were talking about how you came to astrology later in life, and I related to that a lot because, like I said, I just turned 33, and I kind of came into learning astrology when I was 32, in like my 9th house year. And you communicated a similar thing of starting to learn astrology later in life. And I was just hoping that you could talk more about why you feel like that was, and what your process has been like, and if you feel like there are any advantages of learning later, or maybe any challenges of learning later in life.
Yes, of course. It's also a long story that I'll try to keep short. But before my Saturn return, well, of course, I didn't call it Saturn return because I didn't know that even existed. But before that, I didn't like astrology. I thought it was something stupid for stupid people or whatever. I had this no, I don't know, intellectual superiority complex that is very sure that it's it has been proven by science that it doesn't work or whatever. But when I was in my Saturn return, another friend of mine recommended me to cast my chart in astro.com. And he is a person that I admire because he's intelligent, whatever. Mm-hmm. And it was like funny for me, like, why is this intelligent person telling me to go see my birth chart? But I went and I looked at my birth chart, and it was really impressive for me because one of the reasons, personal reasons, for which I didn't like astrology, is that I knew I was a Leo sun, but I never felt particularly Leo. I mean, I knew that I had maybe some traits of Leo, but I didn't feel a Leo person. And well, don't get me started, but just thinking about the sun archetype, I didn't feel like a connection. And when I saw my chart, I have been Buddhist for a couple of years then, like 6-7 years when that happened. And so in that years before that I saw my chart for the first time, I had been working a lot in this introspection and understanding my patterns and emotional, mental patterns and whatever. And I was very aware of my moon, even though I didn't call it my moon. And when I saw the free description that came in astro.com from the birth chart, I was very surprised that the layers I have identified in myself for a lot of introspection, they were there. Like, you're this, but you're also this, but this, but this, but this. This is something true. What happened with this? And also, I read like a brief like prediction, I don't know, report. And I repeat, I didn't know I was living on my Saturn return, but I was living my Saturn return. And the report was focusing a lot in these big changes and these coming to adulthood and this reframing of everything that I have ever learned and whatever. And that was actually happening in my life because that was when I was leaving my last corporate work to enter to work in a Buddhist institution. That has been my dream for some years before. I wanted to give my life whole time to the practice of Dharma and help other people to get to Dharma. And at the beginning of my Saturn return, it seemed like a dream come true. Like, oh yes, you have this work that you always dreamed of, and it was real nice. But very soon afterwards, it started complicated because, well, Saturn. So for not making the story so long, this precision of what I read and what I found in my life really resonated and changed my attitude towards astrology. And I think that I appreciate that I found it later in life, because when I started studying astrology more, I don't know, like more with more attention and more time and more care, I never felt with these cartoon stereotypes that this is this and this is that, and I don't know, this placement should act like this and this placement should act as that. Because I knew my placements, not before I called them my placements before, but before I had the opportunity to know how I relate, how I feel, how I express, how I think, how I believe, how I want things about myself, that I know they were more nuanced than most cookbook recipes would state. And that helped me to avoid that trap that I believe many people get like caught there, that, oh, if you are a Gemini, whatever, or Scorpio, whatever, you are the Antichrist. I don't know, that things that people think. I never fell into that. And I really appreciate that, because I can, well, maybe not right now, but when I was younger, I tend too much to dogmatism. If I believe something, it's what this is the truth, the ultimate truth, and there is no other truth than this. I mean, I have that tendencies, of course, still there, but I try to have them more managed.
Yeah.
But if I had found astrology when I was like more dogmatic, I don't know what would have what use would I have given to astrology. So I think it was in a good time for me. I think that's one of the things I thank the most, at least for the type of person that I am, because I'm not saying that every person should start later in life. I know there are a lot of ways, but one of the nicest things about getting to to astrology at a later in life, is this recognition of ourselves, of life, these experiences that make us like nuance the way we approach things. Because again, if you had told me about Saturn when I was a teenager, my idea of Saturn would be, oh, this is so bad, I hate it, why my life is so hard, why I suffer, and then no one else is suffering the way I am suffering. And that point of view, that now I know that that's not true. not in the way that it appeared when I was younger.
Right.
Not to gaslight the suffering of anyone, but sometimes we take very seriously our sufferings, and sometimes they're not that serious, or they are, but we can grow from them, learn from them. And that's something that I think experience gives. And yes, that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally relate to that. Yeah, I think that there's so much, I mean, especially if you have some habit of self-reflection, which it sounds like you very much did, like learning the significations of the planets and that, learning everything about the astrology, like you can see how things line up, and you can see how like you embody those things in very special or like particular ways. And I think that can be really, really helpful. Like you have a lot more material to draw from as someone who has a bit more life experience. And all that to say, like I know some very brilliant astrologers who are 10 years younger than me, and know their stuff and have had the life experiences that inform that. So it's not to say anything about that. It's just, that's just been my experience, and your experience as well. Yeah. So I think I wanted to follow up with the question about your relationship to the moon as a child. And so like, where has your relationship to the moon gone from that experience that you identify with your friend? And why do you think it's important for us to talk about the moon in relation to astrology? What's important about her?
Yes, that I think. Personally, I've lived like through very different phases in my relationship to the moon. But generally speaking, I think that the moon is very important in astrology and in our lives, because for me, it is about our ability to relate to others and to our environment and to our inner world also. For me, the moon has a lot to say about our adaptive or maladaptive body emotional reactions in life. And we, even regardless of the position or the condition of our moon, if we learn how which are those unconscious reactions towards life, we can live better lives, because we can take advantage of the strengths of our moon, whether that may be, and also to mitigate or to learn to navigate the weaknesses, to say something about our natal moon placement. And I think that the moon has a lot of richness. For starters, as the ruler of the night set, she encompasses all these sensuous, I don't know, like material, intuitive, instinctive, affective, appetitive side of life. And it is really important for us to know how to relate properly with that side, regardless of our natal relationship with it.
Right.
I also believe there's this word that Balance uses to describe the rulership of the moon at the end of his I don't know how to say, like his delineations of the planets. And he uses, well, I don't know Greek, but I will say what I heard from Robert Smith, that the Greek word that Balance uses for the moon is pronoia, and pronoia is a word that those who know Greek tell me that it means something like care. And I think that this caring attitude of the moon is something also very important for who we are, because coming back to what we were discussing earlier in regards to that there might not be a solid intrinsic part of our identity, because everything is changing on that. I believe, well, I said before that one part of who we are is this awareness of what is. And the sun might relate with this awareness of what's happening, of experience, but the moon is the reaction to that awareness, the way we relate to that awareness and how we respond to that awareness. And I believe, this might not be kosher astrology, but I believe that the moon also relates to our natural capacity and need of compassion and of love, because as mammals, we need compassion, we need each other, we need love, we need touch. And I believe that moon associates with that dimension too. And more or less, that's my take on moon.
I think that really reminds me of this idea of the moon in particular being associated with void of course. You know, it's like every planet can be void, can like not come into contact with other planets, but it's particularly important. It's particularly important in considerations with the moon. And that reminds me of, like, if you ever watch kittens, they don't sleep alone. They all sleep together, like huddled up in a mass. And that's there's something that's really important, I think, innately for mammals, to have that sense of like touch with the sense of touch and closeness that is really coming up when you're talking about that element of the moon, like the planet that really makes contact with every other planet. How many times is it a month? Twice a month, you know, makes contact with every other planet by bodily conjunction. So yeah, that really stood out to me. Yeah, so your moon, as you said, is in Capricorn in the 12th whole sign house. And I'm really curious because you have one of these rising degrees where you're at the very beginning of Aquarius. And I was looking at your chart, and like if you were born 5 minutes before, Capricorn would be your rising sign, and your moon would be in your first. And so I'm very curious what that sign of Capricorn feels like for you. And also, like, we could speak to the moon's placement in the 12th house as well, and like what you feel about your Aquarius rising, like being for sure your rising sign. If you can speak to that at all. I'm sure that you've thought about that many times.
A lot.
Yeah.
And since the beginning of my approach to astrology, I also related to my rising, because I felt that it resonated with my experience. But as I said, that was like a casual approach to astrology. I didn't know how the ascendant was really calculated or anything. So I didn't take a lot of attention to this 0 degree ascendant. But when I started studying formally astrology, I was very worried, like the astrologer's nightmare, to have these very early or very late degrees. And especially with these rounded hours, like the hour of my birth certificate, that might be kind of precise, because I was born in a C-section, and I believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that C-sections are a little bit more organized than the natural births. But I've rectified my own chart using primary directions, using zodiacal releasing, and it seems for me sure that I am an Aquarius rising. Maybe not 0 degree, maybe 3 or whatever, but or 2. I'm not very sure, because I need to lean to focus more in this primary direction thing. But at least from the zodiacal releasing perspective, it matches perfectly the way my life has been developing. And that's my my Aquarius attachment, that now I am an Aquarius rising. But also I think that, I believe that it kind of helps to have the same ruler of your first and your 12th, because I believe that this how can I say, on awareness that might entail to have a luminary in the 12th and in detriment and all that, it has been mitigated by the fact that the ruler of that house not only sees that house, but also is the ruler of the first. So I've always seen in my life that, I'm not always, but frequently, when I don't know, when I act wrongly, ethically wrongly, very soon that materializes in my life. But also when I try to act like more consciously and more ethically or whatever, maybe not that soon, but that tends to also have like a visible consequence in my life. So I found this relationship between what I do when I don't notice in my 12th house to that which then manifests in my life or in myself in my first house. And so I really feel this closeness to this relationship between the 12th and the first. That regard my rising. And regarding my relationship to Capricorn, I love Capricorn. I mean, I love Capricorn risings. I love Capricorn suns. I love Capricorn whatever. I really, really like Capricorn energy, Capricorn people. I'm a big fan of whatever Capricorn placement there is. Maybe because that precisely that dimension of my moon of not being seen, of not being acknowledged, when I see people that kind of vibrate in a similar fashion, there's like some closeness that I like in people all over the world with the Capricorn placement. But when I think of Capricorn as a sign, regardless of my personal experience, well, it's associated, of course, but when I try to see it like in a more detached way, I tend to think, as I tend to do with every sign, in terms of the essential dignities of the sign. And for me, Capricorn is very easily understood as the night domicile of Saturn, as the exaltation of Mars, as the exile of the Moon, as the fall of Jupiter, because I can understand the Capricorn trip, to say something, like a place where you need to strive, or you need to struggle, you need to put the work in order for things to work, because you have this both malefic energy operating in there. So also Capricorn being the detriment of the Moon and the fall of Jupiter makes me think that Capricorn is a place where we need to learn how to relate, thinking in the Moon, but also learning how to trust, which is like more of Jupiter realm. And maybe in Capricorn it's not that automatic, because you learn very easily in Capricorn as a space that there are no easy answers, that you need to fight, that you need to, I don't know, to accomplish things, because things are not going to happen magically or whatever. And although I believe there's a lot of wisdom in that Capricorn approach, I believe that Capricorn benefits itself a lot when it understands that it can also trust, and it can also learn how to relate, and how to have faith, and that is not something stupid or whatever. And I think that has informed my relationship with my Moon, this understanding. And also, I don't know, maybe also because of this essential dignity schema in Capricorn, I think that Capricorn has a particular strength, because these both malefics action in there are like giving a lot of resistance, of focus, of, I don't know, of resilience. And even though it can sometimes go overdue, the, I don't know, like the toughness, the practicality that can emerge from Capricorn, I think that it can become also a flex, because I see Capricorn as very as a leadership energy, not in the way maybe as Aries can be also a leadership energy, but in the case of Capricorn, I think like a leadership that comes from mastery. I mean, you are not imposing or inspiring your leadership. Well, you can inspire or impose, but the focus in Capricorn, I believe it is more in the mastery of a skill or whatever. And from that mastery, being able to share or to teach or whatever. And that's something that comes with perseverance, with patience, putting the work again. And that's something that I appreciate a lot of Capricorn, and as in abstract and in all the Capricorn people I know, I appreciate a lot that putting the work energy. But also I Although it's not, again, that, well, it might be, but maybe it's not that kosher, again, of astrology. At least, in our northern hemisphere, when the sun enters Capricorn, it's the solstice. And even though it's the longest night or the shortest day, it's the moment when the light starts to gain presence again. And so I associate Capricorn with hope also, because even though Jupiter is in fall in there, I believe that it's precisely when the night is darker and when the cold is harder that you need hope the most. Because if you don't have hope at those difficult times, it gets much more worse than it can get when you got the hope that you can actually get out of there, or I don't know, recover or whatever. And I have learned to associate Capricorn also with this hope component. And last but not least, and also this is totally non-kosher, but I want to share it with you also, is that that every sign is divided into 5 terms associated to the 5 classical planets.
Right.
And they have different orders, and well, all that. But I sometimes make these thought experiments, like trying to find some kind of narrative in this in the arrangement of the terms in each sign, because I know there are some arguments in why they are assigned the way they are, but for me those arguments are very arid and they don't really tell me nothing. Well, they can be useful, but they don't satisfy me completely. So when I'm not satisfied, I travel in my mind. So regarding the order of the Egyptian terms in Capricorn, which are the terms I use mostly, Capricorn starts with Mercury, which I understand as the need of understanding reality, understanding what's happening. Step like understanding what the fuck is happening. That is like the Mercury thing I associate. Then it comes Jupiter, which I associate with envisioning, as in, okay, I understand how things are, and now I can envision how things could be, how we could, what we could do or what we could accomplish. And then comes Venus, which I associate to resourcing or connecting, because I can have a vision, but I need to be aware of what are my resources and to work, to collaborate with other people to join the effort to achieve whatever I would want to achieve, or we would want to achieve, and also to keep the motivation, because if you don't have like this, I don't know, loving, inspiring quality, it's very difficult to achieve a big goal. So I think Venus comes here like a glue, let's say, and an inspiration. And then comes Saturn, which I believe is like, well, okay, now you have your vision, your resources, and your motivation. And now you order this. You give a structure, you make a plan, you work on a strategy to get to that point that you are aiming to. And at the end of Capricorn, it's the term of Mars, that I like it very much, because in this story of mine, it is something like, well, now you have your plan, now do it, do the work, put the effort, sweat the effort that is needed to accomplish that, I don't know, that aim. And I repeat, I know this is an invention, but it really resonates with me and my relationship with my Capricorn man.
I like this this narrative around the terms, because the terms are kind of random, like in a sign, they're kind of random. So I feel like they're one of the hardest things. Like, I'm generally pretty good at memorizing different things in astrology, but the terms are like quite difficult to memorize. Like, I know like the first 6 of Cancer, like I know is Mars, and that's like one of the only signs where the first part is malefic, because typically the end of the sign is malefic. And like, of course, I know the bounds of, or the terms of my like personal planets and stuff like that, but it's quite hard to memorize. And so I think this narrativization, whether people like it or not, you find some meaning in it, and astrology is a symbolic system of meaning. And so I think that there's real value in that. And it's also very fitting. And the thing that stood out to me was the Venus's triplicity rulership in Capricorn, which I think speaks to very well this idea of like, you may want to do something, but you actually need support from other people, and kind of calling in the team for support felt very fitting for that. One of the things I did want to speak about, though, which I feel like could maybe bring us back to some of the things that you just shared, is if you could talk a little bit about the moon in detriment in Capricorn and how you think about detriment.
Sure. As we started talking a little bit earlier, I believe that oppositions in general, which relate to detriments, are like blessings in disguise, in the sense that they allow us to embody the best of two worlds, and to find equilibrium in between something that usually might go to one extreme or to the other. So in the case of the particularly Capricorn Moon, I think it has its challenges because the moon is not so easily open or willing to relate or to show vulnerability or to feel or to connect with the body, or these things that I was talking about earlier. There's like some chronic mistrust for the moon in Capricorn, that it's not very lunar. But even though those obstacles that the moon might find in Capricorn, I believe that it can also develop some qualities that would be harder to develop in other spaces, as strength, resilience, self-dependency, the self-respect that comes from being able to solve your problems by yourself, and also this this enjoying of silence, of loneliness, like not being afraid of being alone, not being afraid of not being liked or whatever. Maybe in the bottom there's still fear, but at least at a more superficial level, there's a way to easily cope with this loneliness or whatever, that I think that is very useful, because when you start like familiarizing yourself with these qualities of the Capricorn Moon, you are able to relate to others, not because you need them. Well, we need everybody, but I need not from this codependency needs that, oh, without you I can live, but because you want to share with someone, and you can relate to someone and acknowledge the interdependence between them, but not like forgetting that your own limits, your own needs, your own whatever you've got, because you have like this stronger sense of, I don't know if it's of self, but at least of your limits, let's say. And I think that the Capricorn Moons are able to be very loyal and very also very sensible and very affectionate, but maybe more selectively. I mean, maybe it won't be this affection towards everybody, but towards the persons that feel secure, that feel like home, that feel safe. Capricorn Moons are as sensitive as Cancer Moon. I mean, it's not that we don't feel. It's just that it's a more selective and fearful process. But whenever we decide that we are comfortable with someone and we open, we can have still this fertility, this creativity, this sensibility of the moon, but with all these other flexes more proper of the malefics, maybe.
Yeah, I think I'm reminded of Saturn and this idea of Saturn as the gatekeeper, and this thing of, especially perhaps Capricorn or Saturn risings, of being what I perceive as very selective about the people that they have in their life. And that does feel kind of a part of the Saturnine nature of, perhaps the Capricorn moon or a Capricorn rising or what have you. I think it's really important to hear you say we feel just as much as the Cancer moon. We feel just as much as any moon. But maybe it's just the disclosure of those feelings is more discerning, because there can be challenges with trust that's associated with Capricorn.
Yes, and also the what can be a problem, but also a flex, which is like the disconnection of these emotions, because Capricorn moons like automatically, very easily, when there's some intense emotion, even especially if it's not a pleasant intense emotion, it's like, no, I don't want it, and there's like this disconnection that can be very useful, because, for example, you can have problems in your house or with your partner or whatever, and you are at your work, and it's like, this doesn't exist right now. What exists is this. And it's not that you are not hurting, but at the moment you are not hurting. I mean, you might in a more deep level, in a deeper level, but at the conscious level, you are not thinking about that. You are focusing whatever you are doing. And that, I think that's very useful in many instances, but also we need to manage that, because as that is an unconscious process, sometimes we may detach from our feelings, and we can be, I don't know, like rude or insensitive to other people's needs, because we have already disconnected from our emotions, and we can act like more coldly or mean even. And it's not that we are mean or cold, but we have developed this mechanism of disconnection of our emotions, of our body, and we need to learn to reconnect. And the flex, I find, is that when we are more familiar to our inner processes, we are more able to notice when we are disconnected, and to choose, I want to keep disconnected, or to choose, no, I want to reground, I want to come back to my body, and then don't, I don't know, create problems in affective relationships. That might be, at least it's my case, that many times it has also been a problem. I don't know, acting cold, acting distant, or acting as if I don't care, because I don't know, I'm working when I have fought with my boyfriend or whatever. But it's this ability that I think we need to learn how to use, because it happens without our control, and sometimes it's not that helpful.
Yeah, I'm just reminded of my own fire moon, and I'm thinking about elementality in relation to the moon, and this idea of compartmentalization. And like, I mean, we see it all around us. It's very easy to compartmentalize the earth. We divide the earth into parcels, and we fence things off, and all of these things. And whether that's a good thing or not, it's what humans have kind of done, at least in certain societies. But how do we cordon off, or how do we compartmentalize fire or water? It's a little bit of a more difficult thing. Obviously, we can put water in a container. We use earth, like we need earth for fire. We need to burn earth. We need to contain fire in earth so that it doesn't spread everywhere. But there does feel something like I'm a little, not jealous, but I'm kind of like, oh, it would be nice to be able to choose what feelings I want to feel and what feelings I don't, and when and where, because I think I have this element as a fire moon of like, I'm just going to feel what I'm going to feel, and it's going to show, especially being in my first house, it's going to show. And there's like a bit of a, not a powerlessness, because that's too strong of a word, but there's a bit of like, I just got to kind of deal with the emotions as they come. It's like I can't necessarily compartmentalize in the same way. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about that, and talk about the challenges that could come with that, because I could definitely see you get in the habit of just compartmentalizing, and then you never deal with the emotions. But also the potential of putting something aside when it's not necessarily appropriate to deal with it, to be able to deal with whatever is at hand. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm curious if like your experience of that plays into the placement of your moon in the 12th, or what you could say a bit more about that placement.
Yes, I think that being in the 12th, there are like more unconscious reactions to that Capricorn moon, because, for example, I know I have millions of stories, but I remember one time that there was this guy that I liked a lot, and he's a musician, and I went to a concert of him, and during the concert we were like seeing each other, and I thought that we were like vibing, and I was really excited because I was like, oh yes, he's feeling my vibe, and we love forever and ever, whatever. And at the end of the concert, I approached him to say hi, and he he told me something like, "Oh, I saw you, but I didn't know it was you." And when he said that, even though he said it like innocently, my Capricorn Moon activated instantly, and in retrospective, I can see, but in the moment I wasn't aware. I closed myself, and I started acting cold and distant. And, oh yes, oh yeah, and like really dismissive to him, even though when I was really crazy for him, and he was like, okay, I don't know what's happening with this girl, she's crazy or whatever. But then when I saw that event in retrospective, I saw like the way my moon was protecting me, but in a way that was not helpful, because my moon was, no, you don't be vulnerable, you don't need him, you don't want him, you are strong, you can alone or whatever. But it was automatic, and I had no control in that moment over that situation. And that, I think, is part of the 12th house thing, because it's not just the protectiveness of the Capricorn Moon, but also these invisible reactions that are very compulsory, especially when something touches, I don't know, like injuries or inner spiritual, emotional injuries. And that complicates a lot. Well, I mean, that's just a story, but you can get a picture from that complication given the moon. But also, there have been also other instances in my life in which that it's not just my inner conditionings, but also outerly, like especially with women. It has happened a couple of times in my life that I exist, and just by existing, some people don't like me. I mean, I know it happens to all of us, but in my case, and coming to the 12th house thing, I don't know. For example, well, I don't want to make this very long, but what I try to say is that I have been in a lot of situations in my life in which there are people who don't like me, but don't tell me that they don't like me, or don't act like they don't like me, but on my back they act like they don't like me. And it's really hard to notice that, why did I this to you, or why is this happening? And it has not happened that many times in my life, but at least a couple of times in not so beautiful ways. And I also think that it's part of this, because I'm sure that I must have done something to provoke that reaction in other people, but I have no idea what I might have done or whatever. And then this reaction was very hurtful, because I really didn't understand what was the reason for the rejection, or why it wasn't like directly speaken or whatever. And yes, I think that's another not very nice thing of the 12th house part. But not to close in a more optimistic note, I think that one of the good things of the 12th house is that it has propelled me from a very young age to find like spiritual solace or guidance or whatever. And that's why I started like practicing Buddhism really young, because I needed. I mean, it was not like, I don't know, like a hobby or like something that was cool or whatever. It was needed because I needed like this help, and seeking this help has transformed my life. And I think that that's very nice of the 12th house, because especially in Buddhism, but I believe in some other kinds of spirituality can be useful too. It was always easy for me to meditate, for example. It's not a big challenge for me to stay still. It's not that my mind is quiet, but I can like be like observing in a third person perspective the noise that my mind is making or whatever. And I think that has helped me also a lot, and that I appreciate. Well, I thank to my 12th house Capricorn Moon, because I think there's this capacity to see inside that helps a lot with the luminary in the 12th, and also in my experiences, for example, with ayahuasca and with hickory or peyote. Well, those kind of experiences, I think it has also helped a lot, because in the times I had experiences with power plants, they have always been very insightful. I mean, I have always been able to see myself like without a veil, with my good side, my not so good side, the things I do. And I think that is also that 12th house that can, I don't know, like see what is not, what avoids the conscious mind. When I connect to that 12th house, there is this capacity to connect with inner, well, with deeper layers of myself, but also to this I don't know, like this reality that is not constricted to my ego, at least for an instant. I mean, I'm not saying that I am there, because I am not there,
Right.
but for like a glimpse, let's say a glimpse of how it would be to perceive beyond the boundaries of an ego. And I believe that that 12th house moon has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, it feels very like your Saturn in the ninth in Libra exalted feels also very loud as well. You know, like being able to sit for a long time in meditation to clear your mind and do this exercise that leads towards kind of spiritual growth or spiritual enlightenment, what have you. It feels very fitting for Saturn to be in Libra in the ninth house, ruling that 12th house moon.
There's this thing, sorry, I interrupted. There's this thing in Spanish, well, in Mexico, I'm not sure if maybe in other countries of Latin America also, that, well, this is going to be a bad translation, but it's something like God, I know, like chokes, but not to death, or something like that. And that's that's a popular saying in Mexico and Latin America, I believe. And that it didn't make a lot of sense for me before, but when I started studying astrology, I really felt that, because when I think of my moon being in Capricorn in the 12th house, in conjunct Saturn, all these not so good things for her, it's like, oh, my moon is very, very maltreated. But when I think that it is ruled by an exalted Saturn, I believe that God choked me, but not to death, because I mean, it's been hard to learn to relate with that moon, but there has also been support and guidance and some inner resources to be able to learn to navigate that difficult circumstance, that I am aware that it's not so easy for everybody.
Yeah, it hasn't been easy. It hasn't been challenging. It's been maybe painful at times, but it's been rewarding or growthful, or what word would you maybe put to it?
Yes, I think, well, when I think of my Saturn, I always think of him as life-saving, because I think that Saturn and the circumstances Saturn has presented in my life have given me the means to learn to live better. And for that, I feel really, really grateful and appreciative, because I really don't know what my life would have turned to if I hadn't found Buddhism, if I haven't found plant medicine, if I haven't found astrology. I don't know, but I'm sure it wouldn't be very nice. So those moments in which I found Buddhism, plant medicine, astrology are all marked by Saturn, by transits, by a lot of timing techniques, perfections, whatever. And so I really feel like I don't know how to say, but like a bodyguard in there, like, okay, don't worry, we have this cover, you're not alone, even though that's not the usual attitude of Saturn. It's like, you're alone, you have to learn to deal with whatever you are put in front of you. I feel that the exaltation has come in my life as not feeling that, well, right now, I don't feel that alone. Maybe, as I said before, when I was younger, I felt alone in my challenges and whatever. But now in retrospective, I can see that I really never was alone. Never, never, never.
Was never alone in terms of more than human beings, or in terms of your human community, or both?
Both in different times of my life. Because, for example, when I started getting interested in Buddhism, my family was not, well, they don't really care. My nuclear family. But then I have this uncle that when I told him that I was interested in Buddhism and stuff, he paid for my tutoring in a Buddhist institution in Mexico, at least the start of it. And it was really nice because my family wouldn't have given me money for doing that. And I wouldn't have been able to, well, maybe I would, if I could have saved for some time, I would have been able to pay it. But at the moment, it would have been very difficult. And there was this figure who gave me the money to pay for it. And also how can I say, like, as you said, like these non-human forces, because I feel very grateful that I arrived at a Buddhist center that I believe that is very serious, and that is really I don't know, concerned in giving a Buddhist of a quality education in Buddhism, and also formed by I don't know, sincere practitioners of the Dharma. And all the people that I've get to know from that community, they have become my lifelong friends, and they have helped me in a lot of situations along my life. But also, as you said, it's like these people, but also these invisible forces that have moved me to hear this teacher, this thing or whatever. Because even when I started studying astrology seriously, also I was in the midst of another professional crisis, like having the ruler of the MC and detriment and in aversion to the MC is not the the funniest part of my chart either. But coming back to these Saturn invisible forces from the ninth, it was precisely in a hikuri ceremony that I kind of knew that I had to study more astrology and to understand better some parts of myself. At the beginning, not as an answer of that should be the profession I should take, just like this glimpse of you need to study this more deeply. And when I started studying astrology more deeply, I found like the answer, because watching my chart with more detail, I thought astrology could be a good fit for me because of my placement or whatever. And I really believe that these invisible forces have helped me in many ways when I don't know how to say, my natal challenges get me like very lost and really not knowing what to do next with my life. There has always been something that helps me, and sometimes it takes the shape of a human, sometimes it's just an inner voice, or sometimes I don't know, whatever. But it's always present in my life, and I am very grateful for that now.
I'm reminded earlier in a conversation of talking about ecology and also talking about the dichotomy or the duality of chaos and cosmos, or chaos and unity. And I think it's also another example of that. I framed the question as, is it either this or that, and or both? But I do think that it's maybe beneficial to think about more than human beings as part of our community, as part of our ecology, where I think that our human friends can lead us to a deeper relationship with the more than human, and the more than human can lead us into relationships with other humans that nourish us in this very seamless way that, we don't have to separate human from animal, human from spiritual, or what have you. We're all beings together.
Totally. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so we talked about your Saturn. Before we move on to talking about myth, I don't know if there's any myth that you want to talk about. I would love to talk about dodekatemoria and how that affects or informs your experience of your moon being in the dodekatemoria of Leo. And I just want to give a plug to KazimiCon real quick and Cameron Casti, Omega Astrology, on all the socials. Because yesterday, in preparation for this, over the past few days, I watched his lecture on dodekatemoria, which I'll link in the show notes, and it was really, really rich and informative. And I really want to dive into that more. I'm so interested in hearing your experience if you care to share it.
Sure. This dodekatemoria thing. Well, I just want to say, maybe off the record. I mean, I don't mind if you include it, but if you don't, it's okay. I just want to share it with you, and I insist. I don't care if you share it or not with your audience. But from that presentation of Cameron in KazimiCon, I felt it was another of these instances that I was telling you, because I felt compelled to book a consultation with him. And
cool.
So I did, and he gave me a reading of dodekatemoria and hermetic lots, and it was really, really insightful, because even though I used to use the techniques and know by memory where my dodekatemoria, where my lots are, the obsessive quality of mine, it was really enlightening to see my chart from his perspective, and also to have the fortune of connect to his consulting abilities, because he has this balance that I talked before about yourself, that he has a lot to say, but also he knows how to listen, how to ask questions. And I really enjoyed a lot my consultation with him. He's a wizard, and I totally recommend him big time.
Wonderful.
And I wanted to start by saying that, because yes, he's amazing. And
yeah, go get a consult with Cameron, everybody.
Yes, Cameron is great. And so coming back to the dodekatemoria of my moon, I think that it also is it's kind of mixed. The way in which the dodekatemoria nuances my moon, because for starters,
can I step back for a second, and can you just give a brief description of what dodekatemoria is, maybe for those who...
Sure. It is a division in 12 equal parts of every zodiacal sign. So when we divide the 12 signs between 12 parts, we've got 144 parts in the zodiac that kind of work as a kind of, we can say, like a fractal of the zodiac in every part of the zodiac. So wherever we have placements in our chart, they have like their placement in the zodiac, in the ecliptic, but they will also have a place when you project the division you do according to the degrees they are on. I don't know if this was clear or this was confusing, but it's something like that. Well, tell me, was it confusing or was
no, that makes sense. Yeah, I think just to summarize, it's, if you take a sign, it's 30 degrees. If you split that into 12 parts, each part is 2.5 degrees. So within a 30-degree sign, there are 12 parts, which is, or what Cameron calls the 12th harmonic. So hence the dodeca, which means 12. Dodekatemoria is 12.
Exactly. And in every sign, you start with the sign you are watching. For example, if my moon is in Capricorn, the dodekatemoria of Capricorn starts with Capricorn, and this repeats with every sign. And from Capricorn, you go in the order of the zodiac all the way to the, in the case of Capricorn, would be Sagittarius, which is, yes?
Yes.
Yes, I got confused in my zodiac, but yes, Sagittarius, which would be the 12th sign from Capricorn, and this process repeats with every sign.
Mm-hmm.
And so, depending the degree in which we have placements in our charts, it will be projected to another place in the zodiac that we can understand from the lens of our own chart. I mean, for example, I've got the moon at 19 degrees Capricorn, which corresponds to the dodekatemoria of Leo. That's for every placement in the 19 degrees of Capricorn would be in the dodekatemoria of Leo. But since Leo in my chart is the 7th house, then my moon projects itself to the 7th house. So this is one of the parts, I think, that mitigate a little bit this darkness and this unawareness of my moon. For starting with the Leo thing, because Leo and Capricorn are very different energies. And so, well, there's a challenge that which will I come back later, but thinking about the nuancing in a good way, even though I have this moon that, as I've shared before, might have been challenging and might made part of my temperament gloomy and dark and I don't know, like fatalistic or whatever. There has also always been like some sort of like of willingness to keep thriving and to find an answer or to express what I was feeling in a way that maybe I didn't know how, but to find that way of expression that I understand as being, for starters, this nuance between Capricorn and Leo, because the moon is, I mean, it's in Capricorn, but it gets like a nuance of Leo. And then thinking it is in my 7th house, well, it's an angular house. So even though the moon is like hidden in the 12th house, it has like a window, let's say, in an angular house. And as I think I mentioned before, it was mainly in my close one-on-one relationships and my partnerships where I started becoming more aware of this patterning of relationship that I've got and this I don't know, like immediate reactions that I have, these maladaptive qualities that my moon had from early in childhood. These relationships were the windows for me to see that was happening in me and getting like ways to start working with them. And I believe that has to be with that angularity that my moon gains moving to an angular house, but also because Leo and Capricorn being in aversion, that my moon falls in the sign of the sun, even it's not that close by aspect. It still is the realm of the sun, and being the realm of the sun, it creates some kind of connection between my moon and my sun that otherwise wouldn't exist at all. So I think that it also mitigates a little bit the complications of the aversion between the sun and my moon. But as I said, it's like a mixed thing because Leo from Capricorn is the 8th. So using derivative houses from the dodekatemoria, my moon would be in the 8th house of Capricorn. Right. So being in the 8th house of Capricorn, it comes back to these associations of death, of loss, of fear, of anxiety, or whatever. So my moon likes the dark side, but also has this connection to the bright side of the sun. And it's well, this is general with the dodekatemorian. When they fall very near to another planet or angle in our chart, that's really meaningful. And my moon, when it goes to Leo, it makes a conjunction with my Mercury and with my lot of spirit. So one of the things that I haven't thought about before, and Cameron pointed out to me, and I was like, oh, crying in the midst of the consultation, was that maybe precisely all those challenges, all that difficulties that the 12th house moon entail could be projected into sharing knowledge or teaching or I don't know, connecting with Mercury, but also with this search of the Lotus Spirit to find like this actualization of what was my purpose in life. and then hence not seeing that suffering as something separated from my purpose in life, but well, one of my purposes, because I don't think that we have one, but the purpose of the lot of spirit, like there's this connection. And I found that really, really enlightening, because I have already kind of reconciled with my Capricorn Moon, but I hadn't given this lecture of this connection between the moon to the lot of spirit and Mercury, and that was really, really inspiring. And so, well, if you are looking for the dodekatemoria in your charts, take special attention when the projections of the dodekatemoria hit to other planets or angles or points or whatever, because that connection might be very, very meaningful.
That is so. That feels like such a rich, like gives such rich texture to your chart. And even like for some reason with certain aspects, like I was talking about Contrantisha in a previous episode as like a back door. And I really love this idea of like a window into another place, like being able to see into another place that you wouldn't have contact with otherwise. I just really, really like that. And I like this idea of using those challenging experiences or elements of the Capricorn moon as a way of teaching, fulfilling your purposes, as we can think about the lot of spirit. And that reminds me to go back a moment to this idea that you had with Capricorn about hope. And it really reminded me of this distinction between hope and faith. And I think that there's something about, I was reminded of this idea of faith. And I think there's something about the winter solstice and the longest night. And, that's the time of year in many cultures where the festival of lights, like we put up all these lights to shine in the dark. And what is faith but the belief in things that you can't see? And I don't generally really have a conclusion, but it feels like a beautiful thing to consider in relation to Capricorn, given the fact that I do think Capricorn is like, it's like, like your business and like you work hard and like all of these things that, you talked about not relating to your Leo sun. Like I didn't relate to my Capricorn sun for a long time because like I either didn't want the connotations that kind of more pop astrology can bring to Capricorn, or I didn't want to be associated with that, or I just didn't really resonate with that. And so I like that more, because I think that we can forget that Capricorn is like this double-bodied sign of not just the goat, but the sea goat, this combination of the water and the earth, and like this very, Sam Reynolds talks about Capricorn and the sea goat as like this very kind of like almost libidinal thing, like very tapped into something deep, like the deep pulse of something going on. And I don't know, it just feels very enriching thinking about those different elements of Capricorn that maybe aren't as readily discussed or readily available to most people who don't have experience with those placements.
Totally, because I think that many of these pop astrology associations to Capricorn come from a place, from a misunderstanding, in a sense that if we live in a capitalistic world or whatever, and Capricorns know how to survive, many Capricorns will find a way to survive. Many of them, like, I don't know, being the girl boss or whatever, but not necessarily in this crazy capitalist, I don't know, like greedy way. I mean, I know there must be many Capricorns that are greedy, but there must be of any sign. But I think that there's a lot much more about it. I once had a German teacher that is a Capricorn sun, and I really admired a lot of him, but especially that he always liked German culture, and he found a way to create a life in which he could travel frequently to Germany. Right now, he has a German partner, and he has a life that wouldn't be possible if he had played his cards differently, because if you have money in Mexico to travel to Germany every year, you need to be from a certain social class that most of us are not. And he has found a way that even though he is not rich, he can do that kind of travels because of his work. And also he's like a punk rocker. And in the school that he teaches, he can teach in jeans and with his, I don't know, his hair with strange cuts or haircuts or whatever. And I really admire that, because I saw someone that knew what life he wanted to live and found a way to make it real, not being greedy, not being rich, not being whatever, but really practical in that sense. And well, that's just an example. But also there's this, as you said, this other dimension of Capricorn that sometimes might get overlooked, this other like spiritual or this intuitive capacity that Capricorn has, that given our culture might get overlooked, but it's really, really hard. And when Capricorn connects with that other dimension of itself, I think it can become much more powerful than when it is just focused in the material security or whatever.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also wanted to talk about, because you have this, I would say, a conjunction between your moon and your south node in your 12th house. And so I was hoping that you could talk to me more about the moon and the relationship to its nodes, as well as any other aspects between the moon and other planets in your chart that you think are relevant.
Sure. Starting with this south node thing, when I started studying Hellenistic astrology, it was a little bit disheartening when I was like reading about the maltreatment conditions, and
oh my gosh,
when I like match.
I have so many maltreatments in my chart. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, and it's like a funny situation, because I mean we have lived 30, well, you 30, me 40 years in our lives, and we are not dead, and we have smiled and loved and have beautiful times. But when you are like digging in these conditions and stuff, it's like, oh my god, I have this, oh my god, I have this too, I have this too. But although it can be a little bit I don't know, I when I started studying that, I firstly arrived to the conclusion that I was never going to attain emotional satisfaction, because I thought my moon is so maltreated that it will never find the emotional satisfaction that every moon needs. I mean, that was my conclusion. No one told me that. I arrived to that preliminary conclusion. But then something interesting regarding the notes happened, because once I heard from Adam Ellenbeth a take on the notes that comes more from Jyotish. I mean, I'm sure there must be many versions also in Jyotish, as there is in traditional or modern astrology, in Western astrology. But the take that Adam shared was that from that perspective, the South Node can be associated with the spiritual journey, with the need to transcend the material and to go beyond the material. And even though when that can present challenges, because we have a body and we live in a material reality, it can also be some kind of like a propeller of spiritual seeking. And that it also needed to be like taken with care, because we could also exaggerate in that need and make it become evasion, just like trying to escape from the world. And that perspective hit very deep with my experience, because I believe when I first approached spirituality, I kind of I was wanting to avoid material reality. I was trying to escape. I wanted to end with this suffering, but in the process, I learned that I don't know, like there's not that that distinction or that I don't know, that separateness between what's material and what's spiritual. And also because being in Capricorn, it's kind of weird because the South Node in Capricorn, I believe that also maybe this is some evolutionary astrology I don't know, like take, but I believe that it might also entail some kind of familiarization or comfort in the energy of Capricorn, which I can also resonate with because maybe it's the moon, the South Node in there. But since I was a child, I always felt like very Capricornian, like very practical and like very I don't know, like knowing the way things work. I didn't like the way things work, but I knew how things work.
Yeah.
And then I think that when you, well, if we can like mix this acknowledgement of the reality of materiality, but also like give it a turn towards spiritual quality, and then taking it back to a material, I don't know, like concretion. Even though this South Node hasn't, I believe that it hasn't helped me to be very connected to my body, to my emotions, and all that stuff that I said before. I think that it also has helped me to in this search of something else, and this possibility of taking back these learnings from the spiritual realm towards a material realm in my life, and hopefully in the lives of the people with which I don't know, come along in my life. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I think a theme of the conversation we're having is this continued return to the divisions that we create in our mind are perhaps artificial, like the spiritual and the material are not different things. Community, these different kinds of beings are all part of the same community. They're not different things. The chaos and the unity are one. And I just love that we kind of keep returning to that theme. I don't know if it's a particularly Capricornian theme, but I do like that. I do like that we're returning to it. And yeah, like I don't really know that much about the South Node, about the nodes, to be honest. I feel like I'm learning more about the North Node because I feel like the North Node has been talked about a lot recently, being in Taurus and, being conjunct Uranus and all of these things. So I really appreciate you talking about the South Node to give me even like a better sense of what it could mean in my chart. Are there any other aspects in your chart to other planets that you think are kind of relevant to touch on?
Well, if we are not thinking in transpersonals, the only other planet missing is Jupiter, and well, maybe Jupiter deserves his due.
Sure, especially given the fact that we haven't been explicit about it, but you do have a day chart. Like you're similar to my chart in that, but kind of opposite in that I'm born like 20 minutes before sunrise, and you're born like maybe I didn't really work it out, but 10 degrees before the descendant is where your sun is, and so you're kind of like born at this dusk time, and so yeah, like you have a day chart, and so those kind of day sect planets of Saturn, the Sun, and Jupiter are more emphasized, and so I think it's fitting to talk about Jupiter and the sextile that Jupiter and Scorpio makes, with your midheaven to that 12th house moon.
Well, I promise I'll try to keep it short. Even though when it's a separating aspect between the moon and Jupiter, being a whole sign sextile, I think it has played an important role in my life And that's one of the many reasons why I firmly believe in whole sign aspects, because I've seen them in my life. And I believe that there's this, how can I say, like this presence of Jupiterian themes in my life that have also helped me to come back to this at the beginning, to this spiritual search, which is very ninth housey, thinking that my Saturn is in the ninth, but also very Jupiterian. And being my Jupiter in Scorpio, I believe that it has also helped me to have this, I don't know how to say it, like this tendency, ability, I don't know what the word is, but this possibility of finding meaning in difficult circumstances and being able to process strong emotions, losses, fears, some scorpionic issues in a Jupiterian way. And also like guiding, considering that Jupiter is like the most the planet that is highest in the sky in my chart, even though it's in the 10th whole sign house, even though it's cadent because it's falling away from the midheaven.
Right.
Even though it is cadent, I have always seen like this I don't know, I think it's a mix between the Mercurial thing and the Jupiterian thing, of looking for answers and for meaning and trying to have new experiences and trying to expand my horizon and expand my perspective. And every time I have like found these situations in my life, I think that they have really helped me to grow and to understand things in a deeper level. And I believe that there's this like, I don't know how to say, but like mutual support, because I mean, the ruler of my moon is Saturn, which is square my moon, but it's exalted in the ninth, and it can have these how can I say, like these qualities of giving structure or direction or meaning through religion or whatever. But I believe that maybe that Saturn alone could have become very dogmatic. Well, it became very dogmatic, and then the life like threw it down, and and I had to learn better. But I believe that even though Jupiter can also turn dogmatic, being in Scorpio, life is life is presenting constantly these situations in which you need to acknowledge that truth is much more malleable than one would like to think in a Capricornian way, but also that when you try to give yourself to the light and be a nice person and whatever, like do the best of what is expected of yourself, still you're going to get sick, you're going to die, you're going to experience loss, grief, and this other part of life, which is again also part of the path. And I think that Scorpio Jupiter has helped me to understand that and not to be that reactive towards that realities, at least now, because when I was younger, my parents are right now they are very old. And when I was a teenager, they were already old. I mean, not that old, of course, but they were old. And for me, it was from a very young age, like I was exposed to sickness, to old age, to all the implications of the corruption of the body and all this stuff. And when I was a teenager, that was not a nice experience. But from then on, it has made me take a broader perspective towards life, and not losing that of sight, that this other dark side of reality is also part of a spiritual path, let's say.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience of Jupiter in Scorpio, because I feel like it's such an interesting placement for me. I like got into a little bit of trouble, like not really, but I got into a little bit of a discussion on Twitter because I was thinking about the planet's exaltations, and I think that Jupiter. Someone pointed out that I think their name is Michelle. I forget their handle on Twitter, but they were pointing out that I think in Dorotheus, Mercury has triplicity in Virgo, in Earth signs when it's in Virgo, when it's exalted. And so if that is true, Jupiter is the only planet that does not have triplicity rulership in the sign of its exaltation. And I think which is Cancer, which is where my Jupiter is. And I think it's really interesting that whether or not, triplicity aside, elemental things aside, it's very interesting that Jupiter in Scorpio has that trine relationship to both its domicile in Pisces and its exaltation in Cancer. And so it feels to me like a very, obviously it depends on where a native's Mars placement is, but it feels to me like a very interesting and, potentially strong placement. So it's really cool to hear you talk about the meaning making, that kind of Jupiterian thing in some of those like potentially scorpionic, more challenging aspects of life, of corruption of the body and grief and acknowledgement of aging, and what have you. So I really appreciate that. I also think I love people reflecting on Scorpio because Scorpio is my 12th house in whole sign houses, and like I don't have anything there besides Pluto, and so I don't feel like I really have a strong connection to that place. So it's really interesting to hear your reflection. With that, are there any timing techniques that you use that have shown like deepened your experience with your moon or kind of shown you a different facet of it?
Besides transits, that of course are very useful, I have found a very useful the firdaria technique, because sometimes there's this I don't know, like this debate, particularly among modern astrologers, that are not very fond of using malefic, benefic, or maltreatment, or this kind of language in their practice. And even though I guess I understand, because I'm not about fear mongering or condemning determinate placements or whatever, I strongly believe that they are not arbitrary or capricious sayings that this is good, this is bad, I like this, I don't like this, or whatever. But that for starters, they are really descriptive of the quality of that planet. And I don't know, thinking about the essential dignity, maybe how can I say this, like the easily or not so easily way in which the planet expresses its natural essence, let's say. And that doesn't mean that something is good, something is bad. Maybe just that a planet with essential dignity can easily be themselves, and with no essential dignity, maybe that won't be that easy. And when we think that in a natal approach, just not in a timing technique, but just like in a chart, we can approach that maltreatments from a lot of points of view, like we have been doing with my detriment moon, I believe in many parts of this conversation. But when it comes to timing techniques, I believe that it's very important to distinguish which planets are like more honored or better treated in a chart, and which planets are in a more debilitated situation. Because at least in my experience, it is very loud that in the case of my moon, which is arguably the weakest planet in my chart, for example, in the big period, in the big firdaria period of the moon, I have like a really, really hard period in my life, all those years. I mean, I'm not saying that all the years were hell or whatever, but it was a period that it was really, really complicated. And it kind of, I don't know, like got nuanced according to the partner of the moon in the subperiods. but the whole period was really challenging. And in other periods, when the moon is a companion of the other planet, it has also standed out that those have been the difficult periods, even amidst easier periods or whatever. And firdaria is one of the techniques that I use more frequently in my practice, because I found that it kind of helps people to contextualize the process they are living given a time frame. Of course, a nuance or making it more precise when we include transits or perfections and other techniques. But like in a general sense, it helps people not only to understand like a general view of the characteristics or the atmosphere during any particular period of their lives, but also like this prescriptive quality, in the sense that when a planet is active by firdaria, we should connect with the wisdom of that planet. And in my life, it checked very well when my moon, when my moon period got activated, that I started like coming very much back to my body, to my emotions, to all these lunar things. And I found that very nice, because even though it was a difficult period, having this knowledge of, well, this is my firdaria period of the moon, and I should, I know, like have a more I don't know, like nurturing. I have an opportunity to nurture my moon dimension. I think that helped a lot in making that period not that difficult, or at least to get something nice from that challenges.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk a little bit about myth now. And I was wondering if there's any myth that you associate with the moon that you could share with us.
Sure. I would like to share a Mayan myth that concerns, in some recounts, it gives count of the birth of sun and moon, but there are some differences in the myth that some of them don't arrive there. But from the place that I found it at the first time in my life, this was a myth of origin of the sun and the moon in the Maya cosmogony, and I find it very beautiful and also related a lot with Capricorn, even though it might not appear to be about the moon per se, because in the Mayans have another deity for the moon, which is Ixchel, and I'm not going to talk about Ixchel right now, although I could, but I won't. I like this other myth because it makes me think of Capricorn also. And the myth says that long time ago, there were those a couple of twins that were playing ball game in some place in the Maya area, and they were like very happily playing with these rubber balls, something similar to soccer or whatever, but with the hip, that was very popular in Mesoamerica and before. And it is said that this game, this ball game, was something that the lords of the underworld held really dear, because they played that game. And when they noticed that these twins were playing, they got really angry because they felt disrespected, because humans weren't allowed to play this sacred game. So they allured these twins to the underworld, saying them that they will play this game ball with them. But they actually had a lot of traps and challenges for them, which they didn't do very well. So they fall in every trap that these lords of the underworld put to them, and at the end they became some kind of fruit vegetable beings, because the lords of the underworld transformed them into some kind of vegetable spirit beings, and they trapped their spirits in a tree, and they kind of forbid that anyone touched that tree because I don't know, because they forbid that they forbid. And many years after that, one lady, it's always a lady, but one lady found it. Well, she wanted to approach to that tree, and she did. And when she touched the tree, one part of the head of the twins fell into, well, the vegetable head of the twins fell into her, and she got pregnant of that head, of that spirit or whatever. And then she gave birth to other twins, and then these twins were again playing this ball game in their house or whatever. And the Lord of the Underworlds again noticed and got angry again. And so they said, let's show these humans that they are they are not allowed to play this game. And they allure them back to the underworld. But these new twins kind of knew what happened to their ancestors. And they said that was so unfair, and they are not going to do the same thing to us again. And I like a lot that the myth is pretty long, but there are like a lot of stages of challenges in that the lords of the underworld put them to the twins. But in every one of the trials that the twins were put before, that were the same trials that that their ancestors were put in front of, these new twins or younger twins used the help of animals. In the first it was a mosquito, I believe, then some ants and other animal beings that helped them to pass the tests of the lords of the underworld. And they passed all the tests that their ancestors didn't. And the lords of the underworld were really angry because they didn't know how they managed to trick them or to solve the challenges that they gave them. And then they played a ball game with the lords of the underworld, and the twins lost because, well, the other one, the lords were more savvy in the game. But since they have already made it through many challenges, the lords of the underworld gave them like an opportunity to, I don't know, to solve other challenges or whatever, and to play other games with them. And then again, the myth goes like very long because there were lots of challenges, lots of trials and tribulations. And many of them, they lost, and some of them they won. And it was this come and going between the new twins and the lords of the underworld until the final match in which the twins win the lords of the underworld. And in the myth that relates to the birth
did you say the twins became them?
No, they beat them. They won.
Oh, they beat the lords of the underworld.
They beat them, exactly. They beat them in the match of ball game. And in one of the relates of the myth, which associates this myth to the birth of the sun and the moon, it says that these twins became the sun and the moon after they won the match with the lords of the underworld. But besides becoming the two lights of the sky, they also gained the triumph over this game of ball that was really sacred in Mesoamerica and the Mayan culture. And it is said that because they beat or they won to the lords of the underworld, they made the lords of the underworld promise that they won't intervene when humans play this game, and that they will allow that humans are able to play this ball game. And so they did, because they were they lost.
Yeah.
And I think, the reason that I associate, you might deduce, but the reason that I associate this very closely to Capricorn is because, for instance, the twins didn't have it easy. I mean, they both couples of twins, the first ones and the second ones, but I like particularly that the second ones or the younger ones were standing in the learnings of the earlier twins. They didn't manage to accomplish what they set to do, but their failure was not a complete loss, but that kind of put the ground for the new generation to know better and to do things differently. But also, I like that, coming back to this Venus thing that we talked about, Capricorn, it's very nice that the twins didn't beat the lords of the underworld just by their intelligence or their strength or their whatever, but because they got help from the animals of the world, many different animals. And I like that part a lot, because for me it is a resemblance, a very important resemblance of the need to collaborate with others and to ask for help, and to not to think that we need to solve everything by ourselves, but to get resource. And at the end, they kind of won like the final match, but even the intermediate games, some of them they won, some of them they lost, most they lost. And I believe that also it's a very Capricornian thing to don't disparage after losing, but getting again on your feet and try again, try again, and try again until you finally do it. And I like particularly this association with Sun and Moon, because I get this feeling of, after many trials, you can become like the light of the universe, or at least this solar system, in these two different ways, which is the sun and the moon. And that's a Mayan story that I want. Well, I didn't mention, but the names of the twins, well, of the winning twins, are Hunangpu and Ishbalanque. And I although there are a lot of variations of the myth in regards to the region of the Mayan zone where they are shared, the general premise is the one that I already shared.
That's a wonderful story, and I really like how it gets me thinking about this notion about the sun and moon, which, I mean, the idea from the sun, I think the phrase comes from the Bible, which obviously is not directly astrologically related, but this idea of the sun shining on us all, you know, the good and the bad, what have you. And then I'm reminded of, and I just wanted to go back to this idea of, or the concept of firdaria for a moment, because I learned about firdaria from Ali Alomi, who I spoke about in the intro episode of this podcast, but he has a great lecture on that I will link in the show notes as well for anybody that wants to learn more about firdaria. But he also, in his moon episode, he speaks about how people, you know, before our current time, it was quite difficult to know your birth time. And so oftentimes what people would do is, like, they could at least know where the moon is, and they can use that as kind of like, they could do their own bit of electional astrology of like, okay, the moon is in Scorpio, I'm not going to do XYZ, or the moon is in Capricorn, I'm not going to use that for this, and kind of tracking the moon as a way for everyday people who maybe don't know their birth time, don't know the rising sign because of that, are still able to use astrology and have a relationship with these celestial beings. The moon, you know, he talks about representing the people, and there feels like this interesting thing in this story of this second set of twins becoming the sun and moon, those twins kind of teaming up with the animals and like the community, ultimately not for their own glorification, but to give something back to the people, you know, to give this game back to the people, to become the beings that shine the light for us, that make life possible. And so I really appreciate that story, and it is very evocative of a lot of different ideas that are important in astrology, I think.
I'm glad you liked it.
Wonderful. So to move on to our last question, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about, you know, or whether the moon is an important part of your spiritual practice, or whether you've tracked the cycles of the moon in relation to your emotional life. You've spoken a lot about that. Then in addition to that, what suggestions you may have for someone who's new to astrology or new to planetary relationship informing or initiating a relationship with the moon?
Sure. I had like an intuitive approach to the moon that recently I heard about it in also in LEA Olome podcast. I believe it was also in the moon chapter. I'm not sure if I believe it was in the moon chapter. Correct me if I'm wrong. But he talks about in the Islamic medieval period, people using the waxing periods of the moon for cultivating the virtues that you are trying to foster in your life, and the waning cycles to try to cut with the attitudes or whatever things that you don't want anymore in your life. And I have this intuitive approach before knowing that this was a thing, because when I started learning astrology, and I understood like this waning waxing thing, and the implications it might have in, I don't know, the haircut or any other kind of things, I thought it could be useful for allotting the practices that one makes in following like these cycles of the moon. So that, for example, if I am trying to enhance my loving kindness capacity, I try to do it when the moon is waxing, preferably if it's in a sign that is Cancer or Taurus or whatever, but if not, at least waxing. And if I try to get rid of my selfishness or my self-centeredness or whatever things I don't want anymore in my life, I try to do that practice in the waning phase of the moon. And I think it helps, because it I don't know how to explain this, but when we synchronize our intentions with the ebbs and flows of the energy that the moon is like pointing out, I think that we can get like easier flow in that aims that we are looking for. And also before that, I use this. Oh, I think that's more, well, it's usually recommended to women to track like their menstrual cycles, and also in like crossing that information of the menstrual cycle in regards to the moon, trying to find patterns, for example, that in which part of your menstrual cycle you tend to feel more happy or more sad or tired or energized or whatever, and linking that to the phase of the moon. That's a practice, a usual practice in some women circles, whatever. But when that I started doing that before astrology, before taking astrology more seriously, but when I started taking astrology more seriously, I crossed that tracking also with the signs of the moon. I mean, not just the phase of the moon, but also which signs the moon was transiting. And I discovered, for example, that I don't know, for example, when the moon is in Capricorn or when the moon is in Scorpio, for many people, at least in social media, it's like, oh, I hate the moon in Capricorn, oh, I hate the moon in Scorpio. But for me, that's not the case. When the moon is in Capricorn, I tend to feel much more grounded, like more, I don't know, like stronger, maybe because that's my natal placement, even though when it's in the 12th. And when the moon is in Scorpio, maybe it's because my Jupiter is in there, but I feel like the need of intensity or depth, but not necessarily like this dying thing or whatever. And it's interesting to find that patterning in regards to ourselves, and also in some periods of our lives, because it changes with the moon. It's not that, oh, I always, when the moon is in Capricorn, feel this way. It's not like usually in this part of my life, but then something changes and I feel completely different. And I think that it's really important to, it has helped me to understand something that my Buddhist teachers have told me for many years, but I maybe didn't quite understood. It is that when you meditate, you are not trying to achieve a state in particular. You are trying to recognize the state in which you are to start. And then, of course, there are some meditations in which you try to cultivate determinate states of emotional states or whatever. But for example, coming back to the example of loving kindness, there are some times when we do loving kindness meditation that we can feel the love and we want everyone to be happy and to take hands with all humanity or whatever. But there are other times that we really don't feel that we don't care a lot about the well-being of other beings or whatever. And that's okay too, because that's what is in the moment. And tracking the cycles of the moon has helped me to understand that I'm not the same person never, that I'm constantly changing, and then that's okay. And I think that those are the ways in which the moon has informed my spiritual practice. And in regards to the to the recommendation to the beginning students of astrology, I would highly recommend. Well, for women, I would highly recommend this thing of tracking the menstrual cycles and the phases of the moon and the signs where the moon is in. It's a lot too. Yes, it like, how can I say this? It helps to connect or reconnect with our bodies, and to get like a fresher or stronger perspective on regards to what we need. Because I mean, I know that not everybody has the same problem as I do of this disconnection of the body, but for myself, it was really helpful to be more aware that sometimes I'm not sad, I'm just tired, or I'm not angry, I'm just hungry, or I'm not. To distinguish between these kind of things, this tracking is very helpful in regards to that. I recall Diana talking a little bit about this in a different way, but also about this. And to the public in general, I believe that this following of the moon can be really, really informative, because when, as you said before, as the moon is very swift and she does this traveling through the zodiac for in less than a month, we can have a lot of information of how the transits feel, how the things are going. And if we connect to these movements of the moon, we are better able to understand the way some signs express in our livings, or or some planets express or whatever. Also when it conjoins our natal planets or whatever. I think that the moon is like a very trustworthy indicator of the now, and it can help us to come back to the now as many times as we wish. And also, I don't know, I would recommend that people do it in a way that feels comfortable, because I also know people that get obsessed in tracking the moon all the time, and after a couple of months they are burnt out and they are tired and they don't want to know anything more about the transits or whatever. So I think it's nice to do it at a pace that feels comfortable, and don't fixate on having to do it daily or whatever, but giving this organic approach to the tracking of the moon, but journaling or writing down whatever you feel or think or see or dream or whatever when you do it. Because even though when sometimes it might feel, I don't know, like not very important, it has happened to me many times that when I come back to my writings of a year ago or 2 years ago, it makes sense, what in the moment it didn't make a lot of sense. So I think this journaling part is also very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm just reminded of I'm reminded of so many things, but I think the emphasis on the moon's swiftness and change, and this idea of being able to find patterns, but patterns also changing, that kind of tension. I will say that it's very interesting. One thing I will say first before I talk about signs of the moon is that I feel kind of called to talk about loving kindness meditation. And I wanted to say that I think in relation to resourcing my own moon and my own Jupiter, which are in this kind of mutual reception. My Jupiter is the ruler of my ascendant in the 8th. doing loving kindness metta meditation. What loving kindness meditation is literally cultivating, like focusing kind of, or how I've done it, focusing on your heart center and focusing on the cultivation of the feeling of love, and then projecting that energy in different directions. And how someone explained it to me, which I found really, really helpful, was starting with yourself. So starting with myself, and like cultivating loving kindness for myself has been such an important spiritual practice for me, in relation to, just my relationship with myself. But, my moon is in my first house. So I very much associate that with part of my being, or what have you. And so I felt called to kind of share that. We don't necessarily have to cultivate love for others first. We can turn in and cultivate love for ourselves so that we're better able to show up and share that for other people. And the other thing I just wanted to share that came to mind was this idea of like certain transits of the moon not necessarily being what you think they would be. And like my Scorpio eclipse story was like, I laid in bed all weekend. Like I was just tired. But it was not like, it's in my 12th house. It was not like a big story. It was just like, I'm going to lay in bed, and I find, interestingly, with the Scorpio moon, I'm a very emotional person. And when the moon is in Scorpio, I often find just like, I'm feeling less emotional than usual, which is like a bit actually of a nice reprieve, and then
like
interesting. Yeah, like a little timeout. Like, okay, we're focusing on the other things now, but that's not necessarily how one would think the moon in Scorpio, in someone's 12th house, might show up. And then interestingly, when the moon is in Taurus, like we were talking about this before we started recording, I'm noticing that that's also like time when I'm just like, I just want to be in bed. Like, I just want to rest. I want to eat snacks. I want to watch shows. Like, I don't want to really like do a lot of stuff in the world. And unfortunately, like the tempo of the world will make you have to do stuff. Like we had to go grocery shopping today. We had to do XYZ, and it was okay, but it was kind of like, yeah, I'd rather just not do that though. And that's how I see like that placement show up, which I feel is really interesting. But it's just like, yeah, when you do that kind of personal tracking, you can really see how those things happen for you, in the particular, manifestation of your chart, because we all have unique charts and we're all unique people. And so it's going to show up in different ways. So thank you very much for sharing that. And, before we close, I was just wondering if there's anything else that you wanted to add, any imparting thoughts that you have about the moon.
Well, not really, but I would like to thank you for opening this space. I really enjoyed myself a lot. It was really nice to talk to another astrologer and getting to share these very personal things through the lens of astrology, in the hope that it doesn't help only other people that might have similar configurations, but also like inside the exploration of their own charts through these different layers of examination. And I want to thank you because you are really, really thoughtful and nice, and everything you shared was really interesting and enriching to my own experience. And I'm very happy that we finally got this opportunity to talk person by person.
Yeah.
And I hope that we continue talking and learning from each other, because it's been really a blessing for me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would love that. And it's really my pleasure. And thank you so much for being here and for openly sharing from your experience. I really appreciate it. And I'm just really glad that we got the opportunity to finally, talk face to face and do this. With that said, where can we find you? And is there anything that you are working on right now that you want to share with us? Or what do you have in the works?
I I am thinking because most of the things I do are in Spanish, so
Yeah.
for the English speaking audience might won't be very relevant because
Mm-hmm.
I've got a site which you mentioned before, which I am trying since December to fit in a blog to write things, different kind of things, but it's everything in Spanish. So if
Mm-hmm.
someone talks Spanish, they are welcome to visit delcaosalcosmos.com. But if they don't speak Spanish, well, there's not so much to say about that.
Mm-hmm.
I am consulting astrologer, but also teaching astrologer, and right now I am about to start introduction to astrology using traditional lens course, a 20 weeks course, and another more intermediate where we explore these timing techniques like firdaria, perfection, solar revolutions, and this kind of stuff. But they are all in Spanish, so the same point as before.
Oh, okay.
But if yes, I have another workshop on the houses, but again, it's on Spanish. That one is much more directed to a more broader audience because it will be more practical, not so much theory, but trying to show people how to analyze every chart using the lords of the houses and the differences between the lords and the planets in the houses. Given that in Latin America, at least in the social media world of Latin American astrology, there's still not so many teachings on traditional astrology, and I would like to expand the general knowledge of how to use a lord of a house or these things that are very used in traditional astrology. I would like to make it more extensive in the Spanish-speaking world. But for the English-speaking world, if anyone wants to share a thought or an experience or chat or whatever, they can find me in by mail in soycaoscosmos at gmail.com.
Okay.
And in Twitter, my handle is tweet astrologico. And in Instagram, they might find me as Madame Anshelyk. I almost never use Instagram, but if someone writes me on Instagram, I will happily reply. It would be really nice to share thoughts, experiences, even disagreements, respectful disagreements. I am always happy to listen.
Be
also
nice. Be nice to Ángeles, okay?
Please. And yes, that's where you can find me.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I will link all that stuff in the show notes. And just to be clear, do you consult in English or just in Spanish?
I have just made one consultation in English, and I think it was okay. It's for me because it's not my native language, and sometimes it's like my ideas crash between one another. But it could be doable if they are patient with my reduced English skills.
Your English is very good, and we've spoken for over 3 hours, which, as someone who I'd speak Spanish as a second language, not as good as you speak English. Like, I don't know if I could sit through a 3-hour conversation in Spanish and still have my brains intact to like,
they're not intact.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you putting forth the effort. But okay, wonderful. So yeah, if you resonated with Ángeles, definitely go to their website and book a consultation. And I'll link all that in the show notes so you can find it. And Ángeles, thank you so much again for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, SB. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks for listening to the show. I'll see you next time. To find a transcript of this episode, please subscribe to my Substack, which is linked in the show notes. And please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcast or Spotify. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter. See those links in the show notes as well. Please feel free to follow me there and let me know that you found me from listening to the show. If you have any questions or feedback on the show, please feel free to email me at sphallhorary@gmail.com. In the show notes, you can also find links to the websites of the astrologers and other resources that I mentioned in this episode, as well as links to the cover art and the intro and outro music. Thanks. See you next time.